Hello and welcome back to All Things Money. I'm your host, David Blain. Thank you for joining us today. We're in the midst of talking about some rules of thumb that we think aren't really appropriate in today's era of cheap computing power. There's no reason why you should rely on these outdated and frankly deceiving rules of thumb when you can easily compute more accurate statistics. If you missed the first part, you can go on the web, our website, www.dlblain.com. There you'll find archived copies of the show. But just to recap, our first one was subtract your age from 100 to get the percentage you should allocate to stocks. That is completely a pointless rule of thumb. Number two, keep 3 to 6 months salary and emergency fund. Has some merit, but we think you can do much better by actually looking at your specific situation. Number three was set aside 10% of your gross income for savings. I simply don't think, number one, that's enough. And number two, it all depends on your lifestyle in retirement. If you're making, several $100,000 a year and you plan to retire to, the mountains and live as a hermit and you have your property paid for, well, then you probably don't need to save that much. But for the majority of people, saving 10% a year is probably not going to be enough. It's a good starting point. I would recommend when you're younger. I know when I was a young lieutenant in the military, I used to save half my pay. That's right, 50% of my pay. Before I was married, I had a house over in Fayetteville that I shared with some other young lieutenants. We rented a house and used to save about half my pay. Now that'll get you off to a good start. 10% of savings, not going to lead to very comfortable retirement. The next rule of thumb that I think is seriously misguided is you'll need 70-80% of the income that you had while you were working. Once again, I think that just think about your lifestyle today. If you're living on $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. Are you realistically going to want to live on 70% of that, which is $3,500? Most people have a hard time doing it, number one. And number two, what we're actually finding is people's expenses in retirement don't necessarily go down, that a lot of times they go up, especially related to health care. I've done some things on the show previously. We talk about health care expenses and, some wild figure of 70% of all health care spending in America is by the elderly or something like that. I mean, it's just not true that your expenses are going to go down. For some people they may, for a lot of people they don't. Even if your home is paid off, property taxes continue to go up, insurance costs continue to go up. People are spending more on health care, which is leading to healthier lives, which is leading to people wanting to do more with their time. More travel, taking grandkids on trips. Because of the economy, children are not able to support themselves. Children are having to move back in with their parents. Grandparents are paying for children or grandchildren's college. So we're just not finding that the average retiree is spending 70-80% of what they were spending previously. So we just don't think it's a good rule of thumb. Once again, it's certainly not a substitute for, getting with your financial advisor and doing some number crunching and coming up with some reasonable numbers other than this rule of thumb. The next one, I could spend the next 10 years talking about this one, but this rule of thumb, as people are finding out now, is a very bad rule of thumb to use, which is the stock market will return 10% on average per year. This goes back to the historical data from the 1920s. The U.S. stock market has, in fact, returned somewhere around 9-10% per year on average. What people don't understand, and that you've got to realize when investing, is the average is a serious misstatement of the spendable dollars you have. And this has to do with the compounding of returns, the way that markets are made. Stock markets and growth assets make their money in chunks. It's not a smooth type return where it's 10%, 10%, 10%. It's plus 20, minus 15, plus 10, minus 5, plus 2, minus 10. It's a very volatile way of making money. And over 100 years, sure, the average may be 10, but what an individual needs to focus on is what we call the geometric meaning. And that is what we call the growth of the dollar. If you start with $1 and the average return over whatever time period you're investing is 10%, it does not mean that you compounded your money at 10%. The only way a 10% average return equals a 10% compound return is if the return each and every year is exactly 10%. If it is not exactly 10%, then by definition, the geometric return of your money will be lower than the average return. I think I need to stop now because I'm going to run out of time and not get to the other points. So I could spend a whole show on that. In fact, I think I may talk about that in a future show. All right, the next rule of thumb you hear is life insurance benefits should equal 5 times your current income. I've also heard some insurance agent promote 10 times your annual income. Life insurance is for 2 purposes. Number 1 is to replace income. And so if you have income that needs to be replaced, you need to do a calculation. If you earn $100,000 a year and your wife earns $100,000 per year, and if you die and your kids are gone or self-sufficient and you die and your wife plans to continue to work and can live on $100,000 a year, your life insurance need is 0. So once again, this rule of thumb is based on the average family size and a bunch of averages. There's no reason with computers today to rely on that. The last one, refinance your home when interest rates drop by 2 percentage points. Well, number 1, this also, the biggest factor with refinance is how long you're going to stay in your home, as well as the fees that accompany the refinancing. So if you're only going to stay in your home for another 2 years and the fees are very high, well, obviously it doesn't make sense to refinance. Once again, these type of questions can be answered more accurately than a rule of thumb by working with your financial advisor. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's show. If you missed it, go to the web, dlblain.com, and you can listen there. So for All Things Money, I'm your host, David Blain. I hope that you will join us again next week at the same time.
The proceeding was a paid program. The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of WNBU and Inner Banks Media.